Welcome once again to this self-knowledge course. Today, we will talk about the inner chatter and the psychological song. In this topic, we will talk about our constant mental noise and what it is based on. We will discover why there is so much suffering inside us. We will learn how to reach an emotional balance, and how to free ourselves from traumas and resentments by forgiving others and ourselves. So, the objective of today's topic will be knowing what the inner chatter is and what the psychological song is. What are they based on? How are they composed? What are their consequences? And how to work on them. We will see the importance of this work, since these two psychological aspects take away a lot of our energy and keep our consciousness asleep. So, let's start today's topic by talking a little about what the inner chatter is. The inner chatter is that constant conversation, which is in our mind all the time. If we decide to self-observe our mind, we will realize that this mental chatter doesn't stop. In our minds we are constantly talking. We talk about many things. About what we have to do, or about something we already did. We talk about other people, or we complain about something. We talk about something someone told us. And other times we are singing songs in our minds. And if we pay attention, we will see that the habit of chatting in the mind is so big, that meaningless conversations are often being processed in our minds. We have probably already heard that the best way to think is not to think. And this is precisely because we lost control over our mind a long time ago. Then, it is no longer our consciousness that uses our intellectual capacity, when necessary, but it is each of our psychological defects, which have taken over our mind, creating a constant, unnecessary, and insubstantial internal chatter, which has ended up becoming the vice of thinking. And we can see that, when we want to meditate and achieve inner silence, or when we try to stay for a few moments without thinking, we begin to feel anxiety, and an inability to keep our mind still. We can even see how people talk to themselves, and that is the result of that constant internal chatter, which comes to manifest externally. Similarly, people who speak compulsively do so because they do not have control over their mental chatter and end up manifesting it externally. But we need to know that we can begin to achieve control over our minds and to achieve that long-awaited inner silence in which consciousness can express itself directly in us. And to do this, we must begin by knowing what the foundation of this constant internal chatter is, what it is made of, and understanding in depth what consequences it brings us, so that we can come to understand the urgent need to work on it. It is important to start by realizing that in our inner chatter, in each of the movies we make in our minds, we are always the protagonists, the heroes, the ones who always do things well, the ones who always have the best intentions, the ones who always has a very good justification for what they do, or we are the victims. Therefore, you can see that the foundation of our constant inner chatter is our self-sympathy, our pride. Above any affection that we say we feel for others, the truth is that we only show solidarity with ourselves, with our much-loved ego. In addition, we feel antipathy and even hatred towards those who do not like us. If we start to observe our mind and delve into who it is that constantly speaks in our minds, we will undoubtedly find pride, reflected in its aspect of superiority, or in its aspect of inferiority. But it is always total conceit, because we love ourselves too much. We are 100% narcissists. Although we believe ourselves to be very empathetic and sincere. It is that as long as we remain bottled up in self-sympathy, any development of our inner being becomes something more than impossible. It is because of this self-sympathy that we believe that our opinion is very important, and that we know about everything. And that is why we go around all the time expressing in our minds an opinion on everything. We see a person, and immediately we begin to give a mental opinion about how he or she looks, or what is he or she doing. And so we do with everything, with objects, situations, posts on social networks, other people's lives, etc. We believe that we always have to express our important opinion. Then, it is important to start studying and get rid of this self-sympathy if we want to achieve inner silence. And it is important to note that this inner chatter is always made up of half-truths and misrelated truths. Why half-truths? Because always, to each situation that happens, in our mind we add or take something away, to accommodate it, and to defend our pride, our self-pity. Some things happen, but when we discuss the situation in our minds, and even when we tell someone else about it, there are always things we make up, things we add to the reality, and things we take away from it. For example, we have a fight with someone, and there is always that internal chatter about what happened. But never talking about it as it really happened, but our version of the story, in which we justify ourselves, while we blame the other person. We always add something that didn't really happen, but that we assume, and we remove things from what happened at our convenience. We always tend to magnify the bad things that the other person said or did, and we tend to justify, or omit, what we said or did. Our self-sympathy always leads us to tell only what is convenient for us to tell. But also, this mental chatter is often made up of wrongly related truths. And it is when in our mind, we deliberately put together two unrelated facts, to justify our opinion. An example would be that we are walking down the street and a person who owes us money comes in the opposite direction, and that person passes by without saying hello. Immediately in our minds we begin to talk about that person, how shameless he is, that he passes by without greeting, and that it is because he does not want to pay, etc. But if we reflect on that internal chatter, which we suddenly have installed in our minds, and which can last all day and even longer if we don't stop it, we will realize that we are simply misrelating two truths to feed a negative state in relation to that person. Since, yes, it is true that this person owes us money. And it is true that that person passed by and did not greet us. But it is not true that he did it because he did not want to pay us. Because we don't know that. We are only speculating. Maybe that person didn't see us, or didn't recognize us, because he was engrossed in his own mental chatter, or maybe it could be that he actually tried to avoid us. But that part, we really don't know, and we can't take speculation as a certainty. Consciousness is based on facts, on realities, but we want to take our speculations and mix them with facts and defend these as truth, to justify and sustain our mental chatter. Or we hear the neighbors fighting, and immediately we start imagining, speculating, and misrelating facts to keep and feed a mental chatter towards that situation, thus wasting a lot of energy, and feeding many negative defects. And we do so all day long, and in relation to everything that comes to our minds. So, it is very necessary that we begin to become aware of the consequences that this constant internal chatter brings us. The first is that with our constant inner chatter we expend a lot of mental and emotional energy, and many psychological defects, and some really heavy ones, are fed and strengthened by this constant inner talk. Also, our consciousness falls asleep, since we live totally distracted, and consciousness can only wake up and manifest itself when we manage to live in the here and now, by practicing self-observation and psychological death. Another consequence that it brings us is that we enter and remain in great interior confusion, because we can no longer discern what is true of all this, and what is not. Also, that our pride grows, because we are continually feeding our self-sympathy and victimization. And each time the self that needs to criticize everything and everyone grows. And obviously, internally we are making many enemies. Because although on the outside we smile and be kind to others, inside us, many times at the same time, we are treating them badly. And there is this heavy telepathic relationship between us and the person who we constantly criticize in our minds. And to make it worse, we end up externalizing those opinions and comments that we have about others, also generating bad relationships. Now, let's see the most important part. How to work the inner chatter. The first thing will be to learn not to touch things with our inner tongue. We must learn to live in constant self-observation, to observe and eliminate everything that wants to take us out of the present moment. But the most common is that as soon as we see something, whatever it is, or as soon as a thought arrives, be it a memory, a futurization, or an opinion, we immediately become identified with it, and start mentally talking about it, touching it with our inner tongue. Look at this funny but true example, how the mere fact of seeing someone pass by, whose appearance reminds us of a relative we haven't seen for a long time, can become a trigger that initiates an internal chatter, that ends in things that are not relevant at all. They're psychological defects that take advantage of the state of identification and distraction into which we fall for not curbing our internal tongue, introduce their desires, their frustrations, and complaints. It is necessary that we begin to observe how in every situation that happens to us, sometimes we externally shut up, however, with our internal tongue we continue an extensive chatter. And it is important that we observe how many times we are very kind to others, while internally we skin them alive. The second will be to analyze what are we adding, and what are we removing from reality. And there, we could discover many defects that are constantly distorting reality, and that keep us in constant inner confusion. And we will be asking our Divine Mother to eliminate every detail that we observe. And the third aspect that we must consider in order to work on our inner chatter is to put ourselves in the other people's shoes. As, due to our self-sympathy, our mental chatter is commonly based on judging others. In any situation in which we find ourselves blaming, criticizing, judging, or treating anyone badly, for whatever reason, we must put ourselves in their shoes. And for this, we must ask ourselves, when have I done the same thing? Put aside that self-pity, and really search within ourselves for those moments in which we did, or thought, the same thing that we are criticizing in the other person. By putting ourselves in the place of the other, we can discover that within us we carry those same defects that we judge and criticize in others. And we must remember the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So, just as we wouldn't like people to be taking us to their mental lairs to make fun of us, to mock, criticize, or speak ill of us, so, we should not do that with others. Unfortunately, although we are very courteous and even sincere at times, there is no doubt that invisibly and internally we treat each other very badly. More important than what we show externally is how we are acting internally, because that is our inner reality, that is our level of being, and that will attract the different circumstances that we will have to experience constantly. If we learn to work on our constant inner chatter, by practicing self-observation and psychological depth from moment to moment, we will be able to achieve that valuable and necessary inner silence, and we will begin to awaken our consciousness. Let's now study the psychological song. The psychological song is the constant repetition of an internal chatter supported by pain. It occurs when an inner chatter sharpens and lasts over time, because it is sustained by an emotional state of pain and suffering. This new ingredient, that is pain or suffering, makes us feel the need to incessantly repeat that inner chatter over and over again. So much, so that we tell it to other people, but we say it over and over again. And it becomes that psychological song that we always look for the right occasion to sing to others. Sometimes we even become so repetitive with the same story, the same complaint, the same lament, that people come to tell us, "You're like a broken record." Or, they say to us, "Change the disc." And this makes the situation even worse. And what is the basis of the psychological song? It is self-consideration. And it turns out that self-consideration is like a three-headed monster. We could represent it like this, because it is based on three main heads. The first one is the one that thinks, "How good I have always been." The second one is the one that then thinks, "How badly I have been paid." And the third head is the one that always ends it up thinking in revenge, hatred, and resentment towards those who we think have paid us badly, despite our well-known kindness. Let's use an example to illustrate this. Let's say that my partner left me for someone else, and it caused me so much pain and suffering that I turned the inner chatter I had about it into a psychological song. And now I'm sad all the time, and I think about it over and over again, and every time someone asks me how I'm doing, I sing my psychological song, in which I'm going to talk about how nice I always was to that person, and how poorly he paid me, and that now I will never trust anyone else. And I will never fall in love again, and how I hate that person who left me, or the person he left me for, and so on. There, we clearly observe the three heads that support the psychological song. The same structure has all our constant regrets and complaints. For example, I was fired from work. There, the inner song started. How much I sacrificed for that company, and look how they paid me, and from there I began to generate hatred and resentment and harbor feelings of revenge. And the interesting thing is to realize that we are full of psychological songs, since each resentment that we keep within us is a psychological song, that when the appropriate conversation arrives, we will sing again. Or that, at any moment, we will mentally sing again. Due to this accumulation of psychological songs, people become resentful, antisocial, and bitter. And there are two types of singers, which we must learn to identify. There are the public singers. These are the ones who sing their song to whoever wants to listen to it, to their partner, mother, friend, etc., or that post their psychological song on social media, seeking understanding and consideration. And there are the solitary singers. And these are the ones who represent the greatest danger to themselves, since they are usually the ones who have sung their song to people so much that they begin to be rejected. The singer is asked to shut up, change the record, talk about something else, etc. Then, the person resents it, feels even worse, closes in on himself, and begins to complain to himself, to fill himself with hatred, resentment, and sometimes it can even end in suicide, or in committing a crime. But there are also people who are solitary singers because they do not trust others, or because they are afraid of what others may think of them, and they also immerse themselves in their pain and resentment, destroying themselves. There are people who lament internally because they feel that they have worked a lot, that they have suffered a lot in life. They feel cheated. They think that life owes them everything they were never able to achieve. They usually feel an inner sadness. A feeling of monotony, terrible boredom, inner exhaustion, and frustration. Unfortunately, such secret internal songs go unnoticed within us, unless we intentionally observe them. We are not always in good company when we are alone. It is simply normal and very natural to be in bad company when we are alone, since the most negative and dangerous defects appear when one is alone. Obviously, all self-observation allows light to penetrate our interior, to our inner depths. It is essential to observe ourselves when we are alone, in the same way as when we interact with other people. We must observe and analyze ourselves to discover what kind of singers we are, and discover our psychological songs, to work and eliminate each one of them. Let us see the consequences of the psychological song, to start understanding why it is urgent to work on them. The first is that our consciousness falls asleep completely. Because if the mental chatter sleeps our consciousness, much more the psychological song, because it has a greater mental and emotional load. So, we are constantly involved in that suffering. And while we are in those states of hatred and resentment, our vibratory levels are very low, totally away from love, which is the highest vibration in the universe. In addition, this generates a huge expenditure of energy, not only mental, but also emotional energy, due to all those feelings of anguish, grief, despair, disgust, etc. And in that state, all our psychological selves are strengthened, even very perverse defects like the murderous, or the suicidal selves, take the chance to manifest themselves in our minds. The psychological songs also cause us to have bad relationships with others, because people end up getting tired of hearing our constant song, and walk away, or start avoiding us. And we can end up becoming someone whose vibration is so heavy, that people prefer to stay away from us. In that state, it is impossible for us to raise our level of being, it is impossible for us to advance spiritually. In addition to the fact that if we constantly get into pain, into suffering, in what they did to me, in thinking, I am not lucky, I am guilty, I am not going to make it, or they always pay me badly. Well, that is what that we will continue to attract into our lives, because the exterior is only a reflection of what we carry inside. If we want to see a change in our life, we must start by generating an internal change, and that will be reflected in the transformation of our external life and its circumstances. But it happens that, if we let these psychological songs run and let ourselves drown in suffering and pain, we will only attract misfortunes into our lives. We have seen many times how people end up completely ruining their lives, committing crimes, and even committing suicide, for not knowing how to get rid of a psychological song. Now, the important thing is that we learn how to work our psychological songs. And the only way to free ourselves from these is through forgiveness. To sincerely forgive others and ourselves. In inner work, soul growth is only possible through forgiveness. If you live from moment to moment, suffering because you feel that others owe you something, that others have mistreated you, or that others have caused you bitterness, then nothing will grow inside you, because you will always sing the same song. We will see that to really eliminate a psychological song from our interior, we will have to work on that little account book that we keep inside, in which we have registered all our sufferings, misfortunes, and all the people who have paid us badly, or who have not paid us as we believe they should. The first thing we are going to do is identify one of our psychological songs. We can start with the strongest one we identify, the one we always repeat, or the one that causes us the most pain. And we are going to make an effort to recognize how self-consideration manifests itself there, with those 3 heads that I explained to you, and we are going to reflect on each one, to work on the elimination of any psychological song that we have. The first thing we are going to observe is that first head that makes us feel that we have been very good to others. That good self. Reflecting if really the things we did for that person to whom we now have so much resentment, we did them without expecting anything in return. If we self-observe and judge ourselves sincerely, we will be able to discover the defects that were behind so much supposed goodness, and we will see that we always act with hidden interests. That we are not as good, nor as worthy of consideration as we think. In this way we will disarm the first head of this defect of internal consideration, that makes us hold resentment towards others, the good self, or that false feeling of being good. We are then going to observe, discover, and work on that second head of self-consideration, which is the victim self. The one who thinks he have been paid badly. And we are going to disarm this, by reflecting a little on the law of karma, to understand that one is never really a victim, but that everything bad that happens to us in life is just a settling of accounts by the law of karma. For this, we are going to reflect on how many times and to whom we have harmed, and we have even done what they now do to us. Or the times when we have at least thought on doing that, so we will discover that the same psychological defect of which we accuse the other is alive within us. And to realize that there was a time when that defect led us to act in the same way, harming others, and that it is due to karma that we are now suffering those consequences. If you are unable to find when you have done what made you now receive that consequence, you can ask your inner being to show you in the astral plane the cause of it, in a previous life. If we understand this, then, instead of victimizing ourselves and demanding justice from heaven, we will appeal to the law of mercy, seeking to forgive those who have offended or harmed us, so that our offenses and faults can be forgiven. The feeling that people owe us something, or the pain we experience from wrongdoings caused to us by others, are obstacles to all internal progress of the soul. We must start by realizing that everything that happens to us in life is the consequence of something we have done, whether in this life or in previous lives. It is karma. If we are robbed, if we are hurt, betrayed, mistreated, raped, even killed, it is because of karma. The universe moves under laws that are managed by conscious beings. The law of karma is the foundation of this school that is life. All situations are given so that by experiencing firsthand the consequences of our actions, our soul comes to understand and learn, if we reflect on them. That is why we are never victims, since everything that happens to us is fair, and it happens so that we can learn from it. We choose if we sink into hatred, rancor, and pain, repeating the lesson over and over again until we learn it, or if we decide to start operating under new influences. That is, under the law of mercy, and we decide to sincerely forgive, so that we can be forgiven. This sincere and deep reflection should lead us to disarm that need for hatred and revenge, into which all resentment puts us. And instead of keeping those negative feelings that poison us so much, and that prevent us from advancing in our inner development, we better reflect on the actions that we must take to cancel our karmic debts, to stop paying them with pain. And we will achieve this by recognizing and eliminating the psychological defects within ourselves that led us to do the actions that generated us to have to experience that painful situation, and sincerely forgiving others. Also making conscious deeds, sacrificing ourselves for others, giving them this knowledge, so that they can also get out of the suffering and pain in which they are confined by their own psychological defects. If we want to radically transform ourselves, we need to learn to sacrifice our own sufferings, refuse to suffer, and raise our level of being, achieving forgiveness. This has been the topic of today. I hope it is very useful for you. I want to invite you to the next topic, in which we will learn how to correctly combine internal states with external events, to start living in a smart way. See you the next time.